the year. So as we look at our 2020 revenues, we see that property taxes represent about 78% of our overall funding, along with state funding, 14.4%. So 93% of our funding is represented by property taxes and state funding. We look at the budget, the expense side, we note that almost 80% of our total expenses are made up of salaries and benefits. So we see a couple of things that you'll see as we continue to discuss how these interplay with one another given the recent state budget cuts that we received. Last week, we were notified that the state foundation payment would decrease by $542,000 for this school year. So we have, if you recall, 6 weeks left in the fiscal year, and they will start to make up that difference starting with our next foundation payment, which will be on May 22nd, and then we'll have 2 remaining payments. We do not collect enough money from the foundation payment after they take out a variety of expenses to pay back all $542,000. So we will have to return or write a check back to them for $400,000 for over allocation for our state foundation decrease. The governor had, if we look at some of the reasons for this decrease, obviously we understand 35%. They've had a 35% decrease in overall tax revenues at the state level. The current budget, K-12 funding, makes up over 34% of the state budget. So his discussion was to reduce K-12 funding by $300 million, which represented 3.7% of total state funding to schools. Our portion, however, was 15.8%. It was allocated based on our state share index and our predicted fund balance for the end of the year. So we're getting a disproportionate share because we are considered a wealthy district and our taxpayers make up over 70% of our funding. So we're seeing some districts, that have less tax base received a much smaller cut, but we are considered with others in this area, similar, Kinston, Chagrin, Orange, they're all in the same category that we are at. $304 per student was the cut that we are going to have this year. As we also look at this year, we've noticed over the last month or so that we've had a reduction in our interest rate in these STAR investments that we have. We still have above 1%, 1.5%, 1.9% in our Fifth Third investments, but that only has $5 million in it. The majority of our finances are invested in STAR Ohio, and that is reduced down to less than 1.5%. So we're going to have a decrease in this year's budget of about $50,000 in interest income. We will receive a Bureau of Workers' Comp rebate. We're estimating at about $85,000, and this represents a rebate, and we've gotten a couple of these over the years from the Bureau of Workers' Comp because they've had better than expected claims. So our net decrease in the general funds this year will be $507,000. As we've also noted in the last 2 months, with school closed, we're having a net decrease in our food services of about $70,000 in revenue. So given these two things, about $600,000. Now, the concern with the food services that we would need to make a transfer from the general fund. So that's why we keep close tabs on the nutrition services, because we'll still have expenses of payroll coming out of those funds. So what have we done so far? Well, Rich and Nancy and Amy and Sean have looked at areas so far. We're continuing to look at those things. And we've noted we have some savings because, one, we closed the schools in March. And 2, we had better than expected renewals on our medical premiums. So salaries, which include transportation cost, overtime, field trips, athletic events, and supplementals, we're going to have about $110,000 in salary savings. For the last 3 months, substitutes will have a reduction of about $85,000. Over this last year, Amy and Lynn have served Newberry as the special ed administrators, and Newberry had a payment of $51,000 for a portion of their salaries. Benefits and retirements, we certainly have savings when we have savings in salaries, but we also had a reduction. We had estimated about a 9% increase in premiums, and we came in at 5.1%. That's given us about an $80,000 savings in benefits and retirements. Utilities, particularly electricity, that has gone down $30,000 because we have shut the buildings down and Mark won't let anybody in there. Fuel, transportation, yeah, transportation for our buses, they've been idle.
Hi, I'm trying to listen to a meeting.
Since March. That's about $25,000.
What's up?
Equipment, we've basically put a freeze on all discretionary spending. I discussed this with Rich, and that was kind of where we said is to stop spending anything that we could at this point in anticipation of these cuts. And then we also had a savings of $10,000 in our fees and insurance. We are having a rebate back for dental insurance of 1 month. So the month of June will be rebated or refunded back to the district and our employees. So we all hear that we're going to get additional funding. So we had a $507,000 decrease. We are going to get additional funding from the Federal CARES Act. Our portion is tied to our Title I funding, which really means our tying to our free and reduced lunch counts. Of the $489,000 coming back, we're going to get $79,000 of it because we have a small free and reduced lunch population. This money can be spent for a broad range of activities to include at-risk kids, our special needs. We can also use it to purchase technology. We can also use it for virus response activities such as training, sanitation, meals, mental health services, those kind of things. So there's a very broad range of uses for this funds. Currently, we do not have access to those funds, but they should be coming at the middle or late May. ODE has filed for an application, and then they'll put it through a grant fund similar to what we have for our title funds. So that kind of wraps up 2020, and that's kind of what I want to talk about is 2020. We're trying to get you a handle on 2020. As you know, the forecast is due in May. We're going to present that back to the board on the May 26th meeting, but I wanted to give everybody a heads up because you are seeing in the paper the governor's cuts. Now, one of the things as we look at a 5-year forecast is what's going to happen in the future. You know, we can absorb or we can handle these 2020 cuts. We have put ourselves in a very good position for 2020. We've been very responsible. We had a little better than expected income from our collections, but 2021 gets a little bit more difficult to absorb. Now we're listening to a number of ODE today. There was a seminar, a webinar at noon on what we would be seeing in 2021, what to expect. No one has any answers. We don't know yet, but we have some indications of what could happen. As you know, our property taxes, we received a letter from the county auditor indicating that we should reduce our collections by 3% this year. Normally we state our collections at 98%. often get more than that through delinquencies, but this year they felt these shortfalls or the recession that we're entering into would cause a significant decrease in the property taxes. That creates about a net $420,000 reduction in property taxes after we take into consideration some of the Newberry property taxes that will come online next year. The state foundation reduction, we do anticipate a reduction. Currently, we're looking at a 10% flat reduction of our state foundation payment. That's $470,000. Again, this year we had 15.8%. We don't know what's going to happen with the state foundation. They haven't told us. All indications are they will wait to determine how the 2020 fiscal year ends for the state and then make a determination on the state foundation payment. We would love to have the answer now so that we can forecast that. But right now, I would anticipate talking with our finance committee that we would anticipate a 10% foundation shortfall and then deal with some changes after that when we know more information. And we'll know it this summer. In addition to that, interest income, we consider that $150,000 difference from what we originally had forecasted due to the reduction in the interest rates going down to less than 1%. As you know, the casinos have closed, so we're anticipating a 40% decrease in casino revenue. However, we'll wait and see what that is this summer. We'll see when we get our first payment. The county auditor notified us that they would be rebating us back $60,000 in fees. So we'll offset that in our potential revenue reductions. So we have a net decrease of a little over $1 million. It could be much higher if the state foundation payment is above 10%. The potential decrease in nutrition services really depends on when and if we open back the schools in the fall. In addition to revenue reductions, we've been looking at what would be our COVID-19 2021 needs. We need summer instructional services for a number of our students that have fallen behind online. Now, how we'll do those instructional services, we're still working with the Department of Health. You're going to see a resolution on your books on the agenda tonight that would give us some leeway on how to provide those services. We anticipate an additional 3 to 4 cleaning personnel staff that we'll need to have in place. We're going to clean more frequently. We're going to clean more, just more often. And we will have additional cleaning areas to look at that we normally wouldn't clean as frequently. That'll be about $180,000. Hand sanitizers, we have some estimates that could be anywhere up to $250,000 for the year. Sean has been working with Mark to estimate what the needs are for cleaning supplies, hand sanitizers, masks if we need them, and other expenses associated with COVID-19. We don't know the answers. We're working on them. We're looking to see how we're going to reopen the schools, but right now we don't have those answers. And it's okay to say that, but it's going to be, those are large numbers. We're going to see some large increases that will be needed to reopen the schools for the 2021 school year. And again, Sean and Mark are still working. We have a consortium that we're working with that is a joint purchasing consortium for the types of products that we need. Right now, it's very difficult to get those things. We're getting them in small quantities. Mark's been able to procure a number of items, but we need them in volume. When we look at gallons of sanitizer, let's just take, like a Purell, we need 150 gallons per week. So just to put that in, we're a small school district. We're not the size of a larger district. So when we look at these things, we have a lot of pressures on the 2021 budget and going forward. So been discussing this with the Finance Committee. I wanted to bring this to the board at this time so that you know what we're working on. Again, we'll bring this back to you on the 21st, but I wanted to get your input into it. We will not be able at this point to cover all of the cost, so we will be eating into our reserves. How much will we eat into our reserves? We're still working on those to kind of look at, but we're going to have some wide swings in cost. So we're going to have to make some estimates and put that in our forecast and state that they're estimates. It'll be a little more difficult this time than we have had in the future, but we're looking at those. So what happens when we have, we lose $1 million in funding, we need $500,000 for opening back up the schools? How are we going to deal with that? So Rich and Nancy, Sean, Amy, all of us are working on this to try to come up with what we would consider appropriate changes or cuts and savings of our budget. So when we look at level 1, let's say we just need $500,000. How would we do that? We'd have a hiring freeze of all new positions. We'd look at staffing efficiencies that we've been doing. We look to negotiations. We have textbook cuts, operating budget. These are areas that we have looked at, and you'll see some of the negotiations with OPSI that we've been able to look at as well. So that is also on your agenda tonight. We go into further cuts, it gets a little harder to do. We looking at the Newberry facilities. We'll take those offline, obviously. Delaying equipment purchases. Bus purchases will have to be looked at for 2021, whether we normally purchase 2 of those for $180,000. We look at athletics. What's the impact of athletics? Should we not open back up? There is savings there if we don't have athletics. Obviously in transportation, if we don't open back up right at the beginning or we shut down, we will have savings in our transportation, in fuel, and in salaries. If this continues and we look at this and we're not comfortable with eating into our reserves as much, we would look at additional RIF and staff. Now, all of these are level 2 cuts and savings. So what we're going to present back to the board is best guess, and then giving you some additional options that we would have to implement should some of these things happen. We have a larger cut with the state foundation, or we have a shutdown of the school. Again, still looking at these things, still have an unknown. What do we see going forward? Kind of where are we at? Our current action is to evaluate the potential reductions for the 2020 and 2021 budget. Anything that we can look at now, we will take out of the budget. We should have a foundation decision sometime. I thought it was going to be in May, but it's going to be much later. We'll have a set amount of cuts that we would implement should we have that foundation cut much deeper. We will update the 5-year forecast. They're not extending the deadline. That's due to you on May 26th and due back to the state by the 30th. We will look at health department guidelines. Those are going to dictate how we open back up the school. Sean is working he's looking at the CDC guidelines, but we have like local health officials that will have to be involved in that decision. And then we'll revisit the revenue estimates in August after we look at the property tax collections in July. Currently, the county auditor is looking to postpone those collections, but not past the end of July. They may give it a couple of days or 10 days, but they're not looking to extend those past July. So this will be an ever-evolving forecast. We will get new information over the summer. We'll evolve it. Our May forecast is really an update. We're adding in the Newberry information because we are merging at this point. So we're adding those revenues and expenses associated with Newberry coming over to the district. But in October, that's our big forecast. So May is an update, but October will be really our big forecast for the next 5 years. So during this time, we'll be working with the forecast, we'll work with the Finance Committee and giving us better information, but this will be an ever-evolving process. questions from the board? I gave
Karen,
you a lot of bad news.
that 400,000 back to the state, does that have to be in a lump sum?
They haven't decided yet. Normally what happens is we write a check each month, and that's well, we'll have to probably write 3 checks over the next 6 weeks.
Okay.
They haven't decided. We have another meeting with Aaron Roush, who is OD's representative, on Thursday.
Karen, I was wondering, for 2021, you're going to be then incorporating Newberry's revenues into this forecast?
Yes.
And their loss of funds was what, like 264,000 or something?
They lost $143,000, and their CARES funding, I believe, was around $55,000.
Oh, so it's not as bad as I thought, but it's significant.
It's still there. The collections, that's where we're, obviously the collections of they have about $4.5 million in property taxes. So there is a reduction in that property tax.
Yeah, but we're still going to get the collection that's owed to them since it's collected in arrears. So we're going to,
Right.
In one sense, one could argue sort of a windfall there. That is
Yeah,
more than we will be collecting going forward.
Yes, and that's why you see that net of our property tax collections. Normally we would have a property tax collection of a shortfall of about 800,000, but because of that tax in arrears, and we're collecting that on the Newberry tax rate, that's going to offset that by about $400,000.
When you were showing the 2020 numbers, you had a list of expenses, and then you had a list of savings. Yeah, this is the cuts and savings, and then maybe was the next page you had a few more?
I did not. I just put a list of things that we would be looking at for 2021. This is what we're looking at for 2020. Again, our
Okay.
savings that we've seen so far related to the shutdown of the school in March.
Okay, so here we've got a total of 516,000.
Mhm.
And on the, I guess it would be the previous slide, you had a total there of 577,000.
Correct.
So that's why you're saying this year we're going to not eat into the reserve too much, because the difference between those two is 60,000. Is that correct?
Yes, and we had additional property tax collections of $143,000. So we will be able to we'll be able to cover our costs, but for 2020.
Okay. Dan and
2021 is the problem.
yeah. Dan and Chet, you guys are on the finance committee. Do you have any other comments that you want to throw in here? It looks like Karen's done a pretty thorough job of presenting things, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. We met and discussed this with Karen and Rich on Friday. Obviously, this is what the picture looks like today. Come fall, it may be another picture that looks even less attractive to us. So I think that Karen's idea of attacking this now, I don't know if I want to say attacking, but addressing it now and being prepared now, I think it's been well founded. So I do appreciate how hard she's worked on this, especially as we're talking with the teachers union about contract negotiations right now. It's important to see where our financial picture is looking, and more importantly, what we can expect and what we need to watch out for. So Karen, thank you. The numbers that we talked about, we did do a little dressing for the meeting tonight, because as we talked about it on Friday, it looked a little bleaker. We felt that bleakness may be, maybe too bleak. So we took some of that language out of there to a certain extent, but it could be scary. It really could be.
One of the things that we did find out today, The state is expecting a budget shortfall of revenue shortfall of $5.4 billion. The rainy day fund only has a little less than $3 billion. So they're going to have to make cuts. And we represent 34% of the state budget. So we are going to feel those cuts. I don't see any way around that.
Everybody needs to know the situation. Everybody needs to look at to see the numbers and know what to expect. And we're gonna the state's gonna have to do some things. But everybody should know that this is gonna be coming, and we need to prepare for it.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Thank you,
Any
Dr.
other
Beard.
questions for Karen on this?
Yeah, just one brief one. Since so much of this is so unanticipated, how rigid legally is our previous budget and our commitment to our spending? Are we, how locked in are we to, these numbers going forward?
We are locked in to contractual obligations that mostly for personnel and benefits. We have a number of contract obligations related to purchase services, dealing with our students that are outplaced. So there is difficulty in changing that. Where we see changes is really, if we do have to deal with personnel issues, we'd have to do some type of RIF. That is, that would be in place. Obviously, 80% of our budget is in personnel. We've completed a RIF in April. We are working with Newberry, and they have done a RIF coming over too. So we have, to my favorite phrase by Nancy that loves, is we have right-sized our district to the best of our ability. Some of the suggestions coming out of the webinar today were to increase students' class sizes, reduce personnel cost by increasing student class sizes. That's on one hand, but when you reopen schools, it may be social distancing on the other hand. So we have competing objectives. We will look at how we would reduce. We have a set benefit package in place until December 31st. We have, that is something that we're looking at, and how we would change the benefit packages. So there's some things that we still have the ability to change. There are some things that we do not. That's not I can't tell you an exact number, but we are obligated to follow the collective bargaining agreements that we would negotiate and what we've already negotiated.
So a lot of the purchase services that we have, which benefit students, I'm assuming we don't have a way to actually deliver those ourselves, and we couldn't really cut those. Are those pretty fixed then?
We have approximately $2 million at our latest estimate. Amy and Lynn have worked very hard to come up with that when we've merged together with Newberry. These are programs we have for the county programs. These are outplacement of students that we are not able to service in our district. So those are areas now. Every summer we're looking at those. We work with families. We reassess students to see whether they would come back into the district, whether it's an appropriate placement. But that's working with a team of professionals. We would look to our psychologists. We look to the intervention specialists. They make those decisions as a team, along with the family, to determine what's the best placement for those students given their needs. So those currently we have about $2 million, in more than that. I'm sorry, we added $2 million to look at that. So it's a significant cost for us. And those are, again, determined through placement with an IEP.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I believe next is a presentation by Mrs. Benacasa.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
Dr. Benincasa. Pre-doctor.
Yeah, but I
Pre-doctor.
turned in a new draft, so I'm getting there. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Second of all, Jamal and I would next time like to request to go before Karen's presentation, because that is basically a terrible act to follow. But anyway, moving along, we have been tasked with looking at before and after school programming. This came out of really as a response to the grade leveling meetings that we held with community and parents early in the fall. And as some of you from the board attended those meetings, several parents at both meetings asked about before and after care as an option as they started to look to changing their schedules if the grade leveling would go forward. And we made a promise to them at that time that we would look into programming and what options we might have to provide some options for them in that vein. And so I started researching just some school districts around us and happened upon programming that was offered at Chagrin and in the, I believe, elementary building. And it was through a partnership with the YMCA. And when I started to reach out to the Y, it was very appealing. And it also enabled me to connect with Jamal Hill. And Jamal is joining us today. Jamal's the East Director, East District, Child Care Director from the Y, who is in charge of several sites on the east side of town. Chagrin is one of them. And we have talked extensively about some of the offerings and options that the YMCA might be able to provide to our families, coupled with using our facilities. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to talk with you briefly tonight is Jamal and I, but really Jamal, wants to tell you a little bit more about the programming, the specifics of the programming, and what we would ask the board is to allow us the usage of facilities. And we had looked to put this programming at Westwood for morning and after care. And we believe that we would be able to provide transportation to Lindsay, both after morning care and before after care, in order to have our students all together in one site, again, to make it easier for parents for drop off and pick up.
Are you talking somebody?
Oh, I think somebody in the audience was fond of the idea. Thank you, whoever that was. But with no further ado, I'd like Jamal Hill to talk with you just a little bit about the programming and the nuts and bolts of it, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for allowing me to join you all's board meeting this evening. Again, my name is Jamal Hill. I'm the District Director of Child Care for the Y. So just to kind of follow up, what you see here is a brief overview of our before and after school program. So we currently run programming starting with pre-K through 6th grade at some of our sites. But we currently offer morning program and afternoon program. So as you can see from what Nancy and I were discussing, we were talking about program hours supporting those parents that do go to work, bright and early. So starting program as early as 7 a.m. And talking with a lot of the parents in that area, they were talking about it, a lot of them work in town or in Shaker, and how, later care is not as conducive to their schedule. So we're trying to provide an opportunity for early morning parents that do need care for their children. So we'd be running program from 7 a.m. Until the time that school starts. So obviously for the students that would be going or busing to Lindsay, we'd be collaborating with the school to be able to provide programming with those young people until it is time for the bus pickup. But then we would run program until the day began for the school there at Westwood. And then in the afternoon as well, beginning our day at 3 o'clock with programs set up and preparations for the afternoon in time for the students to begin arriving shortly after 3:30 and running program until 6 o'clock. So looking at those times, we try to get a lot of input from our program participant parents and finding out what times the majority of them, finish up with their workday, and also try to make sure that we're really listening to, the families that we're serving. So some of our programs run until 6:30, but the majority of them run until 6 o'clock in the evening. Just below that kind of talks about our program overview. So I really try to help preach to parents that we're not just one of those programs where, you throw out some balls and have kids play for 2.5 hours. We do add a lot of structure to our days, both morning and afternoon. So our staff do prepare lesson plans, not extensive as teachers in the classroom, but we do make sure that, there's an overall theme for the week. As well as individualized and group activity that relate to said theme. So there's an order and there's a reason for all the programming pieces that we try to provide. So again, we in there I talk about the adding assets. So we have very strict curriculum, so we're not just doing something just to take up time, but again, going back to making sure that we're focusing on the developmental needs of the young people that are in our program, knowing that the majority of them are with us a lot of times more than they are at home throughout the work week. So really trying to provide a holistic approach to supporting the young people outside of the time that they're in the classroom and during the time that they are with us. A couple of activities that we do provide is Why Kids Are Fit. So that is part of our physical fitness curriculum that we do. So throughout the week, it's almost a smaller version of gym, but making sure that we're really looking at not only the physical health of the students, but also making sure that, there's a nutritional aspect to it. There is a family aspect to it, to where it's not just the child, but we're incorporating things that the young people can go home and share, with their family and friends when they're not with us. And then I'll also post and pre and post test to make sure that, that there is growth throughout the time that they are with us. Our staff, we really try to aim towards individuals that do have education backgrounds. And we do have a lot of development while they are with us. So not only the mandatory trainings before the first day, but continual training that we do through to ODJFS throughout the school year, to where we have a certain amount of hours that we need to hit, every quarter. Specifically now, while program isn't in place, we still try to make sure that our staff are working on developmental opportunities to prepare themselves for our next program period. So again, that's a brief overview. I did share, I can share too, so we're currently running critical care programming at all of our branches. So, obviously a lot of parents are still in need of working during these times. And we've opened up critical childcare at a lot of our YMCA locations. And we're really taking that same kind of concept of keeping in mind health and safety and also social distancing. We're currently making a plan for what that would look like with summer camp programming, and even in the fall, again, paying close attention to some of the updates that we receive from state and local government officials on how we can really provide safe programming for the young people that we are serving.
So on our part, this process to move forward requires us to have approval as a site. They would have to come and take a look at our facilities and make sure it met all of the requirements for the programming. And one of the reasons that we chose Westwood was it's centrally located, number one, but more importantly, we're looking to hold this programming in the library and an adjacent classroom. And there's restrooms right by that location. And then they would also have some usage of the gym depending upon availability. And so we like that in terms of everything being right there, and it's right inside the door, so ease for parent pickup and drop off. was a piece of that puzzle as well. So that is why Westwood's the location we're looking to. But what we would ask the board moving forward, not tonight, but we would have a contract for you to look at, to make the connection, to use the facilities, and then we would start the application process. Obviously, the unknown with COVID is what the fall will look like, but we would still want to move forward and have programming in place regardless, because whether it be critical care or whether it be traditional morning and aftercare, we would have options. And Jamal has been wonderful and working with us to talk us through so many different options. And we would likely start small, and that programming can evolve based in community interest and parent interest. And so that's very appealing as well, because we can really make that program specific to West Geauga and West Geauga needs. And that's super appealing. So obviously the curricular program for me was, they had me at hello, because when it was based in curriculum, and also they were very willing to have some of our tutoring allow that to be a part of the programming as well, if we would have a need to do that. So those two pieces for me were a great sell, and I think it would provide a great opportunity for our parents and for our children. So I'm excited to at least present that to you as a possibility for us to think about, and then later we would come back to you to think about a contract and approval of a contract.
Thank you, Nancy. How is this program paid for?
Parents, and it's paid for, there's different pay structures that we could utilize. And so we'll be working to develop that and working with parents to see kind of the usage. Sometimes you can do a daily pay rate. Sometimes you can do a weekly, a monthly. You can offer a variety of ways to pay for it based in student interest. So that could be an evolving part of the process too. But Jamal will start us off with what the Y pay structure is in similar districts around us. I know that Solon has a site at Roxbury and Chagrin has a site. So we'll probably mirror those to start and then see our usage and you know, grow accordingly.
I was just wondering, after Karen's dramatic presentation, whether you were going to now say, we need to come up with another X $100,000 for this.
No, no, Karen.
Good
Don
move,
Benincasa
Nancy.
is super excited I'm working with Karen, who's curtailing all spending of Nancy Benincasa in every way, I can assure you. I'm like, don't spend a dime. No.
So
No,
Nancy,
but
I'm wondering,
obviously, that's super
when-
appealing too, Dr. Pierce, because parents will be through the Y. We're just really a facilitation in terms of facilities. And so it will be really parent-centered. So I love that part of it as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Katowski.
So Nancy, I'm wondering, and maybe Jamal could talk about this too, because I'm assuming other schools have extracurricular activities like our drama program, which will remove a whole bunch of kids for a certain time from that cash flow that the Y is going to experience. So how are they going to be able to cope with that? I mean, because I'm sure parents wouldn't be too pleased about paying for being in the play and paying the Y and so on. So how's that going to be worked in? That's like 5 or 6 weeks of kids being pulled out to some degree.
Well, Jamal told us, you can share the story, Jamal. I can't remember if it's Chagrin and the basketball programming, but I could see it working that way.
Yeah. So again, it's all, about kind of communicating beforehand. So for instance, over at Gurney, there are basketball leagues, there are karate programs, different programs like that other students are participating in that are also in our after school program. So a lot of times that's coordinating with the parents and also coaches. So where that, student may report directly to gym class or basketball practice for that 45 minutes or an hour. And then they would be signing back out to come to our program and be with us for the remainder of the day until their parents get there. But again, there are ways that we've been really collaborating with both the parents and the schools to make sure that we coordinate that. That would also be something that we would plan ahead. So depending if we know, for instance, the drama class, if we know there's X number of kids that are going to be participating in that for, 4 to 6 weeks, we make sure to market the program to other individuals that do need, those services to provide. So it's not just, these 40 kids, for the full school year. We would just try to find, what other populations of students, require before and after school support, and how can we work with those individuals to provide that care.
Yeah, I think a big piece of working that out will be working with the PTO, because the younger children in particular they don't have to actually be there all the time. And so there's a lot of supervision, volunteer supervision that goes into those kids, that time when a lot of those kids who are taking advantage of the after school program could simply be in the program and with a little coordination, just come down when they need to be there. And that'd take a big load off the volunteers, for instance. And
Right.
the kids too, because the kids get kind of restless. They do a good job, but kids do get restless.
Right. And again, like you said, I think it's just kind of finding out, what programs are currently in place, and how could, our team with the Y, really collaborate with those teams there to, whether it's help support some of those activities or just like you said, just kind of planning ahead to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, I believe, is public remarks. Mr. Kish, has anybody signed up for public remarks?
I do not have anyone in the chat room, so that is a negative.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to routine items.
Yes,
Karen?
yes, resolution 127 to approve routine matters of the West Geauga Local Board of Education to include the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Kathy, you're on mute.
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Dr. Marquardt.
Personnel resolutions. Resolution 128 is to approve supplemental contracts for the 2019-20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Can I
Any
say
que-
something? This involved an agreement with some of these with, well, we'll talk to the next one. I'm sorry. One more. It's the second one.
Would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes.
Okay, before I read resolution 129, which is a resolution to approve revised supplemental contracts for the 2019-20 school year, before the vote is taken, Karen, did you want to explain or
I did.
the coordination with the WGEA?
As you know, the spring sports season was had about 10 days before we closed for the schools. We worked with the WGEA to come to a compromise regarding the spring supplementals based on the fact that spring sports ended abruptly. They met with their executive team, came up with a proposal. We worked through that and came up with this really a revised supplemental contract. The head coaches will be at 50% because a lot of that work was done prior to even the practices starting. And then the assistant coaches would be at 1/3 of that contract as well. So this will involve not only the WGA members, but also will go into the service contracts you'll see on resolution 130.
So can we have a motion to approve resolution 129?
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Are there any questions? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski.
Yes.
Resolution 130 is to approve the revised service contracts for the 2019-2020 school year. And as Karen noted, this follows the same ratio and rationale as the teachers who serve supplemental roles.
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions? To call the roll, please.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth.
Yes.
Resolution 131 is to approve changes in classified contracts for the 2019-20 school year. This is a change in status from probationary to continuing contract.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey.
Yes.
Resolution 132 is to approve a change in a classified contract for the 2020-2021 school year. And this again is a change in status, this time from limited to continuing.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Resolution 133 is to approve classified limited contracts for the individuals listed for the 2020-2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? To call the roll, please.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes.
Resolution 134 is to approve classified probationary contracts for the 2020-2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski.
Yes.
Resolution 135 is to approve the Ohio Association of Public School Employees, number 255, and the West Geauga Local Schools Terms of Agreement from July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021.
So move.
Second.
I think we should thank our negotiation team as well as the employees of OPSI for having reached a conclusion on a contract in probably record time. We want to make sure that we thank all of you guys for the hard work that went into that. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make, Dr. Marquardt?
I was just going to say something in my report, but I'll say it later. Thank you.
Okay. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth.
Yes.
Resolution 136 is a resolution to authorize the petitions for the educational programming to the Geauga County Department of Health.
So move.
Second.
Is there anything else you want to explain about this, Dr. Marquardt?
This resolution really relates to the provision of services for students who have special needs. Some of the services that we have for our students that go beyond the traditional services offered by the school district now in this time of social distancing are problematic. And this resolution authorizes us to explore remedies to provide those services. Amy, did you have anything that you wanted to add that I did not sufficiently explain?
No, I think what's important to remember is just the safety of our students and staff and families is paramount. And so what we're hoping is with some collaboration with the Department of Health that we're able to offer the services that we want to do the right things for our students, but also maintain safety above all things. So moving forward.
Both staff and students.
Yeah.
Correct. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? To call the roll, please.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey.
Yes.
Resolution 137 is a resolution to authorize distance learning for the days and hours that district school buildings are closed to students during the 2019-20 school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And before the board votes on this, I would just like to note that this is not a requirement. This is not an after-the-fact CYA move on the part of the board. This is actually something that we're doing just to legitimize and underscore the choice the board has made at the directive of the governor and of the Ohio Department of Education to provide these services. It basically legitimizes it and memorializes it.
Did we have a motion? I'm sorry.
No, not yet.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Resolution 138 is to authorize the payment of staff until the conclusion of the 2019-20 school year.
So moved.
Second.
And this is something that we have been doing. It's just a matter of making a clear statement. Is that correct, Dr. Markwright?
Karen, is this specific to one situation or is this
No,
in general?
it's in general.
Okay, yes, then yes.
Okay.
I thought it might be a reference to something else. I didn't want to answer in a
No,
way that wasn't truthful.
this is our belt and suspenders for appropriate authorization for the auditors coming in.
Gotcha. Yes, then yes.
Okay.
Thought it might be something else.
Not this time. You call the roll, please.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes. Okay, Rich, now you can give your superintendent report.
Now the superintendent's report. It's actually a relatively brief report. The last few weeks have been relatively quiet weeks with Newberry. I know we've been working a little bit in the memorabilia committee, and I know that Newberry is preparing to sell some of its treasures in an auction. Jim Kish has been our representative to work with representatives from Newberry to establish ways that we can preserve some of the memorabilia. Some that is not being sold is going to be coming over, obviously, to West Geauga, and we'll find a fitting place for that amongst our trophies and our own memorabilia. As you noted from Karen's speech tonight, it seemed like a speech. It was a long one, but it was a very good presentation. A lot of our efforts lately have been spent focusing on COVID-19, the challenges and the opportunities that have arisen as a result of that. We've obviously had to look a great deal at our spending. We've had to look at preparations for next year. And I don't think any of us could have ever envisioned the fact that we'd be talking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on things like hand sanitizer or looking at the need to acquire masks, et cetera. It really is sort of a new territory for all of us in public education. One of the things that has been on the minds of people with great immediacy, obviously, deals with the way that we have to end this year, constrained as we are by the social distancing elements. The most public incidents of that probably are graduation and prom. And there has been a great deal of attention gone into particularly graduation. Prom is on hold at this point in time, but I know that Mr. Bishop and the senior advisors at the high school have spent a great deal of time trying to determine a way that we can have a virtual graduation that is actually meaningful for our students and celebratory for them and for their families. And so I know that the senior parents and the senior students have already received notice to this, but I don't know, I know the board knows because I've sent the information to you as well. But just for the record tonight, we are putting together several elements of this non-traditional graduation ceremony, a portion of which involves students coming in to receive diplomas individually with a certain degree of fanfare on a stage set up for that presence outside of the high school building, receiving their diploma. They will be videotaped. That videotape will be put together and spliced together so that they'll have a lasting memory. About the only thing missing is the proximity of the kids to each other and the ability to hug their friends and to share laughs and to share camaraderie with their students at that event. Because as I say, because of social distancing constraints, students will be walking across the stage one by one, and they'll be dropped off and picked up in that order as well. So it's quite quite a large undertaking when it comes to scheduling it. I was going to say gargantuan, and that seems a bit extreme, but it's a large undertaking. It requires a lot of scheduling, but I think the end result will be very nice. There's also a parade being planned for the students in their cars, whereby the staff and parents will be able to see them, everyone's staying in their own cars. And then there's also a plan in place to have a large gathering of students in their cars at a local drive-in to see the finished product once it's produced. And we would like to have a fireworks display after that. So for those who thought that a virtual graduation was going to be boring, it's not. It will be anything but boring, but it will also be very non-traditional. There have been some who've asked the question, well, what will happen if the social restrictions are lifted and by August we could have had a regular graduation? Well, the opportunity to have that graduation in Severance Hall will have passed. But if in fact the restrictions are lifted so that a regular traditional ceremony would be permissible in August, we would plan to replicate the type of ceremony that we had in 2015 when we had a stage at on the football field and had a graduation ceremony there. I don't think that will happen, but nonetheless, in answer to those who say, well, what if it does happen, that would be our plan to move forward with that. So I really want to thank Jay Bishop and his staff and the high school student leaders who helped put this together, because I knew there were a lot of meetings happening behind the scenes, and we were getting pressed by a group of relatively vocal parents who were saying, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? And we'd say, be patient, please, and we'll have an announcement. So that announcement came out this week, and I hope that really this is a meaningful time for students and their parents. This is a tough time for the class of 2020. And it's also a very tough time for their parents, because as the students were looking forward to these milestones in their lives, so too the parents were looking forward to celebrating them with their students. So I think that it really is something that we are obligated to try to do our best to make their memories meaningful, even though they won't be what they had envisioned in the past. And then finally, last but not least, I really did want to reach out and give a shout out and a thank you to our OPSI staff. We did put together a contract that really was done, I think, relatively quickly. We had obviously discussed some leading up to it. I think we knew where everyone was pretty much going to be, but it was a very, very good and meaningful negotiations process. I think there was open communication, honest communication, and I was very, very impressed with our classified members' willingness to recognize the realities that we're facing right now as a school district, and their willingness also to negotiate a contract for a year so that we can get a better look perhaps at the economic landscape a year from now. So I wanted to say thank you to Teresa for all her efforts, Teresa Polking, and then also all those who worked with her, and then also to their representative also who helped us to get through this process. So thank you very much to the OPSI staff.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Marquardt? Okay, next is board reports, and I've got a couple of things to say under that category. You know, we've been talking about the transition of Newberry joining us next year, and one of the big things that's in addition to all the educational aspects is the disposition of the buildings that are there. And one of the things that I think we've all agreed upon is that we need to make this be a positive impact on the school district. And that includes the Newberry Township as well as our students. It needs to be done properly so that the financial stability of our district continues. It needs to be done in a way that the students in our larger school district have a benefit to them as well. And so all of those types of things have got to go into our determining how to handle those buildings. One of the things that you know we've talked about before is having a community input session. And Kathy and I have been working with Maggie and David Lair, Maggie Zook, the president of the school board at Newberry, and also a consultant to pull together a presentation that will be a live presentation followed by an ability for people to input their ideas as to how to handle the property there. We're still kind of zeroing in on a date. It may be the 20th. It may be the following week. We're going to have to decide that real fast. And so that's coming up. Watch for when we actually get a date. And if you've got some suggestions, even tonight, as to what date you think might be better, please shout out quickly. One of the things that we are going to be sharing at that meeting is a high-level analysis of the costs and the financial side of things of the buildings. And Sean and Mark Richardson and Dr. Marquardt have spent a fair amount of time pulling together some numbers. And I would like Mr. Kish to pull up the first slide for us, please. Here are the just a few numbers. The property value was assessed at $750,000. That was an assessment that was done by the Newberry board in January. They hired this firm to come in and take a look, assess what the value of the property was. Of course, that is only part of the story. The other part is, what does it cost to demolish the buildings? And Sean and Mark have worked with GPD to get estimates of that based on a state rubric for square footage and also asbestos maintenance abatement. You'll remember that there are sort of two buildings there. There's the main building, which is the oldest part. It then extends back to a large gymnasium. That's all considered in the main building. Then there's also the bus garage, and the demo costs of that portion would be $800,000. Then there's also the smaller building to the north, which is the middle school. It also has the auditorium, and the demo costs for that, based on square footage, would be $186,000. They also consulted with a company about well closure costs, which is an EPA requirement, and that would be in the range of $10,000 to $15,000. GPD has estimated that there would be engineering costs just for the building demos of about $40,000. But if there is need for an environmental study, for instance, what excuse me, are there any other cleanups that would need to be done to that property? That would be on top of that approximately $40,000. So that gives us that range that's indicated there. So the total range of costs that we have right now is about 1 million to maybe about 1.1 million, in just round numbers. There are two other things that at this point we do not have numbers for. One is the removal of the stadium and for preparing the property for sale. The other question that exists yet is whether there are actually underground tanks associated with the bus garage that would need to be dealt with. For those of you that have been around for a while, you remember this was a major issue at the Russell School. There certainly are other scenarios that you can come up with, as far as demoing one building but not the other, and retrofitting one building for use, demoing part of the main building but not all of it. Those all have additional costs, additional savings. The point here is to give you some idea of the range of costs that we're looking at. And as we get ideas from the community on other options, we'll be able to put together what those costs are as well. You go on to the next slide. Mr. Kish. Thank you. The question also comes up, if we were just to mothball those buildings, how much would it cost us for them just to sit there and not be used? The estimates that we have at this point are that there need to be somebody involved in some maintenance, mowing, snow removal, that type of thing. So that would be one person. There are utilities of electricity and gas. Those were estimated at half the current costs. And then supplies and repairs. Again, what Sean and Mark did was they looked at what the existing costs are of supplies and repairs on an annual basis and cut that in half. They also got a quote from the insurance company for the insurance costs that we would need, to insurance coverage that we would need to have. And so you see that that's a estimated total of something like $200,000 to $250,000. Of course, there are unknown expenses that we have no idea what they would be at this point. Something breaks and needs to be fixed, like you have in your house, like we have in the school district already. And those we have no idea what they would be. If portions of the buildings would be retained, there would also be additional costs to make them functional and to maintain them, which are not included in these. This is truly just to mothball the buildings without any use at all. So hopefully this gives you some idea of the kinds of costs that we're looking at in relationship to the buildings, their value, the demolition of the buildings, maintaining them, and these will be shared with, Maggie is sharing them with the Newberry board tonight at their meeting, and they will be shared at the public meeting as well, so we wanted to make sure that you guys saw them ahead of time. And they will be used as guidelines for people to hopefully come up with some ideas as to what might make sense for the use of that property. The Newberry Township has been approached and told that, you know, we need to, the trustees, I should say, that we're interested in doing something with this property, and they realize that they need to be involved. Actually, tomorrow, Maggie and I will be at the county commissioners meeting to let them know that we are moving forward having this community input session, and that if they are interested in participating in the future of the property, that it'll be a time for them to state their interests. We also are looking at having another input session that will be focused on just the governmental type of organizations, because remember, we can negotiate with them on what to do with the property prior to putting it up for any kind of public auction. Are there any questions? I want to again thank Sean, Mark, and Rich for spending some time on pulling all of this stuff together so we can get it boiled down to a couple of pages to give you some idea of what the costs are that we're looking at.
I do have one thing, Bill. And this is really, I guess, for Mark and Sean. Did you look at the possibility of a building like this being mothballed in the way that homes that are foreclosed are, where the thing is winterized? It's, you know, like, for instance, antifreeze put in the drains and so on, so that there's actually no heat on, and you know, that cost saved and so on. So basically, utilities shut off, or is that something you didn't look at?
Sean, do you want to comment on that? I mean, I think you could, if that could be done, Ben, then you can just subtract off those costs, I would guess, or a portion of those costs.
Yeah, what I was curious about is, you know, buildings like this are obviously different than homes. You know, homes are, when they're foreclosed and winter comes, they have a team of people who come in and they, for instance, blow water out of the water lines, put antifreeze into the drain so the traps don't freeze, and do all those kinds of things that allow them then to shut off all the utilities. But I don't know if buildings on this scale and this type, if that's actually done to, you know, you've got a whole different set of potential problems. So I was curious.
I can answer that. I don't know if Sean is on there or not, but I can answer it. We did that. We discussed it, and Mark is very adept at knowing how to do that. The costs that we have are still reflective of that, Ben. You know, one of the things that we discussed was, you know, the importance of having someone there just to sort of supervise things, to make sure things are well maintained. You know, I gave the example, in fact, of, well, what if a pipe were to break in the winter? And Mark said, well, we would have all the pipes winterized. He said we would have already done that. So, and that's routinely done with athletic facilities, et cetera, even when schools are in session. When you have your outdoor restrooms, et cetera, those are shut down and winterized. So the buildings would be shut down and winterized, any portions that were vacant. But still, we feel as though we'd need to have someone there. If there were something that happened, we'd want to know right away. If there were a roof leak and water was coming through the roof, if there was a broken window or some such thing, or if something else happened. Sometimes even when you do lower the temperature in buildings such as that, even when they're mothballed in that nature, you have to keep a certain degree of temperature in them. You can't let them go down to 0 when it's 20 below. You know, you have to make sure that there's something there. You're going to have shifting and plaster cracking and all those things. So the costs, the issues that you just mentioned were incorporated into the costs that were given to you.
Okay. And I agree with that approach, Rich, that you're taking, because if in fact we're going to mothball the building to see if there's a use for them, well, we want them to be in the best possible condition so that, so that someone can come in and use them and not suddenly have sheets of paint and worries about lead abatement and all these things that they would have to do with those that would come into play and increase the cost of then reusing those buildings. So yeah, I think that's, if we're going to do this, if we're going to mothball them, then keeping them in good solid shape so that they can be marketed to the community would be the best thing to do.
Well, and I think one of the things to realize is that even with the mothballing of them that way, I think sometimes people, if they don't give it much thought, can think, well, that's relatively cost-free. It's not cost-free, because even when you mothball something of that nature, you still have to have someone there. You still have to have snow removed. You still have to have the grass mowed in the summer. You still have to have someone doing building checks and walkthroughs of the building. There will be things that happen just as a result of the building sitting and aging. If you've ever looked at a residential home, when a family moves out, it's amazing to me how quickly the home seems to deteriorate when there are not people living there, moving in and out on a daily basis. I don't know what happens, but the houses seem to age very, very prematurely. And the same thing happens with the school building. And one of the things we really want to make sure of is that does not become an eyesore. Because as it becomes an eyesore for the Newberry community, it also then becomes an eyesore for the West G community, because they'll be one and the same.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Rich, because I know the benchmark that you've established is that it doesn't become an eyesore for Newberry, that it doesn't become a problem for the community. So yeah, thanks for that.
I have one quick question. This becomes our issue July 1st?
Yes.
Correct. Well, June 30th, technically.
Okay, and from that standpoint, if we were to leave the buildings intact or we were to sell the buildings, is there a possibility of having a deed restriction to what those buildings could be used for?
I think that's a question you'd have to ask legally, but I believe that there is after the date that they would become ours, because there are certain entities that could purchase properties that would be not to the advantage of the school district moving forward. And I know I've had sort of a sneak peek at some of the drafts that Dr. Beers has put together. And one of the things that he did, without trying to give away, steal your thunder here, Dr. Beers, because it was you who did it, not I. But I know that one of the things he's planning to roll out are the list of priorities that we would have to look at with those buildings when they became the property of West G. And certainly the financial and the fiscal health of the district moving forward would have to be something that would come into account when a determination was made for the use of those buildings. And then I believe also someone tonight mentioned, and I think again it was Dr. Beers who mentioned some of the legal parameters around which we would need to work, and within which we would need to work, I should say, in order to make that come to pass. But yes, we would want to see that whatever went in there benefited the West Geauga school community, which would then include Newberry certainly, and also would not pose any threat or any encumbrance on the West Geauga local schools, because it would be counterproductive to have something go in there that would not benefit the schools, such as a charter school or a school that would draw students away from West G. And there are other entities also that could go in there that just would not be good for the schools. So yeah, we want to guide that.
Karen, I also know that when we first talked about this merger a year or so ago, we had a number of suitors for this property. Does that still exist?
We have not had I have not been contacted by anyone since in quite some time. Now, they may be, you know, we had designated that I would take any any interest, but I have not seen any of that. I've not had any. There may be something that Newberry has worked with, but we've not received anything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll continue to update you, and please watch for when we have this community input meeting. And hopefully you'll be able to attend. It will be a virtual meeting for the presentation, and then it will be an online submission of brainstorm ideas, which will then be processed by our consultant Dion, who's with Burgess and Burgess. I've been very impressed with the work that she's done. I'm very pleased with our having retained her to help us through this. Are there any other updates? Ben, do you have anything that you wanted to share or not tonight?
No, there's nothing new right now. So
Okay.
we'll have to see.
Kathy, do you have anything else you wanted to add about our interactions with Newberry?
No, you covered it, Bill.
Okay. Okay, in that case, I think we're ready to move to executive session. We will move into executive session to discuss personnel matters, including appointment and/or employment. Also, a conference with legal counsel related to pending or imminent court action and negotiations. There will be no actions taken after we get out of the executive session. Can we have a motion to move into executive session, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Dr. Beers, I do not see Dan McIntyre on the call, but I do have Nancy, Rich, Karen, and all 5 board members.
Okay. Yes, I talked to Dan earlier today, and he wasn't sure he was going to be able to make it or not. He gave me a summary statement.
Okay.
I don't know if he may
If he comes in, I
come a
can
little
let him
bit
in.
later, or what, Jim?
Okay, if he comes in, I'll let him in.
Okay, thank you. Let's see.
Roll call.
Oh, sorry. Roll call, please.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski.
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
All right, we'll be placed into our executive session and then return back into regular session after that is ended.
Okay, I have to unmute them all. Kathy, you're unmuted. Dr.
Okay.
Beers, you're unmuted. I think everybody but Dan. Okay. Everybody's unmuted.
Okay.
Motion to
So,
adjourn.
Second.
is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey. He's muted.
Oh, sorry. It's not letting me unmute him. That's why. There you go, Chet. Sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thanks.
Good night.